All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Dead Draw Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Etchy. Joining me are Jake Gearhart, Gabe Smart, and Michael Davidson. This was supposed to be like a big podcast, but a lot of stuff happened. A lot of things came up for people, so we're doing this now the normal size. We're not going to have the Giga podcast, sorry. But there's a lot to talk about because Worlds is in, I think, exactly 1 week. Exactly 1 week. We're recording this on Friday, so a lot of things to talk about, a lot of decks to complain about, a lot of professor's research complaints from Jake. All this stuff, we'll cover all of it. But before we get into it, I want to quickly just thank everyone for supporting the Dead Draw Gaming channel. We recorded a lot of content while Gabe, Michael, a bunch of other DDG members were out in Chicago. Michael's from here, but still came down for it, so that still counts. But we recorded a bunch of content. The content was really well received, a lot of views and stuff on that. We really appreciate it. Definitely going to try to do stuff like that again in the future. And we have a lot of exciting plans for the channel, so make sure you subscribe. We're going to be doing a lot of recordings while we're at Worlds as well. A lot of like midday, mid-Swiss rounds interviews, interviews with players before and after the event, all that kind of stuff. So you definitely don't want to miss it. And then I think the best place to start for the World Championships is just general thoughts on the meta. Now that the set's actually out since the last podcast where we kind of talked about stuff, people have been playing online tournaments. Obviously, everyone here played games with the decks and the cards before they even came out, but now that everyone else is playing with them and we have more results, I wanted to just start with general thoughts on the meta. And I think Jake's probably a good person to talk about this with his tweets where basically you're saying if you're not playing, what is it, Regidrago or Lugia or a lightning deck, you have to like pick and choose what you lose to, right? Why are you saying this?
Yes, I think in general this format is very very polarizing in terms of like the matchup spreads of a lot of decks. They've all got like one terrible matchup, and so you sort of have to choose what you're going to lose to. Like I think Regidrago is like definitely the best deck in the format, and the deck with the best Regidrago matchup is either Raging Bolt or Lugia. I think Lugia has a better spread overall. So like you basically and Lugia's matchups are very opposite to Regidrago. Like Regidrago like takes a little bit of a shaky control matchup. Lugia destroys it. Um, Regidrago is like pretty good into like Charizard and Guardian. Lugia is a bit worse into those. So they sort of like have a bit opposite spreads. And I think those two are like the front runners of the format, mainly Regidrago, but Lugia covers a lot of different things. So you pretty much have to choose which one of those you're going to lose to if you're not playing them. Or you can play Miraidon, which is like the one deck in the format that actually beats both of them. So yeah, that's like the poll I put on Twitter. You
Yeah.
you play Regidrago or Lugia, or choose which one to lose to. And if you refuse to lose to either of them, then you need to hit your generators.
Does
Um,
Quad Thorns count as one of the lightning decks in your grouping of lightning decks?
yes, it does.
Okay.
That is why I didn't put like generator deck because I wanted to include the Thorns in there. Thorns is pretty like destroys Lugia unless they're playing a tech for it, and the Drago matchup's pretty good. Like it's actually like an interesting matchup to play from the Regidrago side. Like you often have to get like Squawkabilly motivated in there to like recover energies because the crushing hammers are a big deciding factor in the matchup. But yeah, the out of those like three main decks, they all play 3 to 4 professors research. I guess not Quad Thorns, but the Miraidon generator style decks, Lugia and Drago. And I think that's also like part of the reason why this format is like very high rolly, because like on one end you want games to be like different from each other. You don't want like the same game to play over and over again, which is what can sometimes happen with like Arvin based engines. But research is the complete opposite end of the spectrum where you have to you're playing it because you can't survive off of just searching for what you need every turn with Arvin. So you like are praying to hit the combos that you want, and then also hoping that you don't draw a hand with too much that you can't get rid of. Um, and yeah, a lot of games are just lost because you start an opening hand that if you research away, your win percentage goes to the floor, but you have to because you need to play the game. And if you research into it, miss your combos, that'll also end the games often.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are my thoughts so far.
Do y'all's thoughts kind of mirror that? Do you also feel like it's pretty high rolly, and those are kind of the decks to kind of prioritize and work around?
I definitely agree that Regidrago and Lugia will like end up being the front runners of the format. I think Drago will have a decent amount more play than Lugia, which makes sense. I think it'll easily be the most played deck. But I agree with like the take that like Lugia kind of has like it's not exactly opposite, but somewhat opposite of a matchup spread as Regidrago. So I mean, those two are the decks to beat. I think Zard was obviously getting a lot of hype like before the set came out, but like just like in the online tournaments is it's getting played a lot, but it's not like doing very well. So I think like I don't just like the flaws of the deck have been exposed more now that the cards are already out, I guess.
Yeah, I think that every deck feels like it has some problem with it. I think that over the previous formats, there's kind of always felt like there's like the strongest deck that really doesn't have very many weaknesses. But I think like as of right now, everything feels like it's not as powerful as some of the top decks in the past. I think that that's kind of like where we're at as of right now. I think that yeah, Regidrago is probably the strongest deck in the format overall, just because it kind of has a chance versus everything. I think that it actually will be probably the most popular deck. I still think a lot of people are going to play Zard. I don't think Zard is an exceptionally powerful deck as of right now. I think its Regidrago matchup is just relatively tough, and then the Gardevoir matchup as well doesn't actually feel very good. Like regardless. So like I think that we're kind of in an interesting format where like every deck has like a major weakness, it seems like, but it feels like Regidrago from my testing has the least amount of major flaws, except I would say that the deck takes a lot of 55, 45s and 50-50s, like as opposed to, something like a Lugia V Star, which, probably takes a couple 60-40s or 65 um 35s versus, some of the top decks in format. So, yeah, I think that right now, probably Regidrago is the deck to expect. Probably is going to be the deck to beat, but I definitely think there's um, quite a lot of decks that could see success.
Yeah, it seems to be the recurring theme here. We last when we did our last podcast, we did predictions for what we expect meta, and we all basically agreed top four would be Regidrago, Zard, Guardy, and then Lugia. And I think all of us would probably change our answers now that the sets actually come out and people have been playing more games and stuff. It's pretty interesting how kind of things have flipped since then, but in such a short amount of time too. But clearly, Regidrago has just been kind of a force to be reckoned with, and I think that's probably the best place to start with in-depth discussion on Regidrago, because I think it's almost certainly going to be the number one deck in the room on the World Championships, and I think everyone has been testing against it and has a lot of thoughts on the deck. So I guess the best place to start with Regidrago is what is the problems that you mentioned, Gabe, that you're seeing some problems with the deck. What are the problems you see with Drago?
Sometimes you draw a lot of cards and you have a 20 card deck and you haven't done anything for the entire game. Like I feel like the problem isn't burning through your deck. It's just that you need so many cards to pull off your attacks that sometimes you just draw like a bunch of superiors on the first turn, or just like you draw like a bunch of like combo based cards kind of in the wrong order, and that's kind of the problem that I personally have had. I think that Pheasantipity helps out for the late game. I think before Pheasantipity, things like the unfair stamps of the world were causing a lot of issues for the deck, but I think that like Pheasantipity kind of fixes um the end portion, but it kind of feels a little bit chaotic at times. Like sometimes I feel like I'm burning like way too many resources, and it takes me, you know, using Squawkabilly, burning through pretty much all my energy switches, and I've attacked once, and that feels like really really rough. So I think that's kind of the problem. However, the deck does have those games where you just draw like super well, and you're sitting there on the second turn, you have like 5 energy in play, you haven't even V starred yet, and like in those situations, the deck just feels unreal. Situations where you can pull off like the Dragapult play, like on the second turn of the game, like turn to Kierim as well. Like you can just kind of blow decks out, which is I think like the biggest thing, like going for it. But sometimes it feels like there's almost too much going on.
It's like a deck that takes like there's three different like major combos in the deck, and your engine is just discard and draw cards. So like putting together any of those combos is hard. Like one, powering up your Drago, or you often need like 2 energy switch. You need the energies for the Ogerpon and your fire energy for Drago. Then there's also getting the attacker you want in the discard pile, which is another like 2-card combo, and then throw on top the Cologne Prime Catcher Kyurem combo. So if you draw the combo that you want at the right time after you play your research or your Iono early game, you're set to do whatever you want. But pulling together those combos like reliably is a bit of an issue. Like the V Star power also, like it helps a lot. The fact that it's like it's a combo piece getter, and it also helps you get attackers in the discard pile. Like if the V Star power didn't exist, Regidrago would be terrible as a deck. Or even if the V Star power was like just some other effect that like didn't help you pull off your combos, it would be an unplayable deck. But because you have that like the ability to get back cards from the discard pile, you can afford to like use research as your engine, which you really need to get these big combos. But yeah, any deck that needs to pull off stuff like this, or getting Archeops in the discard pile in Lugia, like they're going to have major issues in the early game if they can't pull off whatever they need to.
Kind of like Fusion Mew did. Got so many different things like going on, right? And then with the judge on the first turn, you can hit them with a Melodious Echo, but that can kind of cause problems because there's so many different routes. Like, so that's probably the deck that it kind of reminds me of.
Yeah. One of my biggest issues, like with Regidrago, or kind of like one of the biggest issues we're thinking about for our group, is that like you're gonna be playing so much mirror. Probably it's gonna be like your most common matchup, and the mirror is like it does have a lot of skill and it has like a lot of lines, but a lot of the time it will come down to like the first attack. And if one player like gets to also if one player gets like keep their V Star and one player has to burn it, that player's at like such a significant disadvantage. So the mirror is skillful, but to be playing, I don't know if it's like skillful enough for like the best players to consider. A lot of good players will definitely play the deck. It just like makes it hard to consider when it's not a super skillful mirror and it's likely going to be your most commonly played matchup.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Lugia mirror a little bit, where it's like the player who sets up best is going to win every game. But in the Lugia mirror, if both players set up, the player who's going first and attacking first is probably going to win anyway. Whereas Drago, if both players set up, it's actually a bit more interesting. But getting to the point where you're both set up is like definitely an issue. But I think one of the things that is like definitely thrown a loop into the Drago mirror is the Iron Leaves that Yoshiyuki Yamaguchi played at the like Japan training camp tournament a couple weeks ago. Because before, like getting the first attack off in the Drago mirror was like just a huge deal, and it still is. But now you have the option to do a first attack with an Iron Leaves, so you can use that to set up like 4 prize turns with Phantom Dive. Like if your opponent passes with an Ogerpon active, you can turn 1 Iron Leaves that for 180, and then next turn knock out 2 Ogerpon with a Howlucha Prime Catcher combo. So you can initiate the prize trade if you're going second on your first turn, which is something that the deck didn't have before that, and I think that makes it a little bit more interesting. Because like doing 180 damage is not a very strong attack, but the things that you can put together from that are pretty interesting. No, yeah, I was also going to mention there's like some really interesting stuff you can do with Kyurem as well. Whereas like if your opponent has 2 like a Mew and a Squawkabilly, or Pheasantipity and Squawkabilly, you can go like boss Ogerpon and Kyurem, those 3 things, and then next turn boss Ogerpon again and Kyurem to knock out all 3 things in one turn, because you obviously can't hit Ogerpon on the bench. So you have to bring it active. But yeah, if they have those 2 prizers in play, you can win the game in 2 attacks, getting those back-to-back gusting turns, which adds another thing that you can play for in the mirror and have to be worried about your opponent doing against you.
Hard to pull off, but it can definitely happen. So again, just high roll into it, and it's totally fine. I think my main issue with it has been a lot of what's been said here, but like you also just like can't tech for things as easily. Like you can throw in a temple against Lugia, and it definitely can help a good amount of the time, but the odds of it coming up on the exact turn you need it are really slim, just because of the way the deck functions, where you're just like constantly drawing through cards. Like, it's if you need the temple on like the last turn of your, it's like last turn of the game, right? The odds of you having to Legacy Star before that and discarding it already is pretty decent, and just like you like kind of need to play, like, if you want a good Lugia matchup, you need more than that one temple, but you don't have room for more than one temple really. So it's kind of annoying with that too, where you're just kind of forced to have this weird matchup into stuff like Lugia. And yeah, just a bunch of like 55 45s like Gabe was saying. It seems okay, but it does seem like it does have the least amount of problems compared to something like Lugia, which I think is probably the next best deck to talk about here, because I think this is the deck that this deck picked up a lot of steam since that Japan prep tournament, in terms of just like popularity and people wanting to play it, because it does just have a pretty solid Drago matchup and can handle everything else to a pretty solid degree. Um, who wants to start with Lugia talk? I'm trying to think of a good question for it.
Well, before we get into Lugia, well, I guess related to Lugia, the temple, like on the point of temple and
So,
Drago, I actually found that the card makes like a pretty big difference and makes the matchup like fairly close.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
It's still probably not like it goes from being like a 30-70 matchup or something to like a 45-55 or maybe even closer. Because a lot of the times, like especially like something like Iron Leaves can be very good in the early game. Like it's a pretty easy attacker to set up without using your V-Star power. So you can like Iron Leaves a Luminion. That's like a good way to start the game. And then that saves your V-Star power open for getting the temple on the next turn, which is really where you need it. Like you need the temple for the second attack to usually stick them, like knock out their Pheasantipity and make them miss an attack for a turn while you attack with Radzard, or try and set up like a Radzard into Lugia plus next turn temple Phantom Dive to take 4 prizes, or like those types of combinations. So I think that the temple is actually like a lot more useful in that, because you can also throw it down like whenever you see it early game, as long as you're able to conserve your V-Star power by using attacks like Iron Leaves that are a bit easier to set up. You can conserve your V-Star power, throw down the temple whenever you see it, and then your opponent's forced to bump it, and then get it back once you use your V-Star power on that second to last turn. So it's a little bit more consistent than I expected it to be initially, to where it makes that difference.
I was gonna say I agree with Jake about like you honestly can play a decent amount of like niche tech cards in Drago, because in a like for the most part, I would say a decent amount of games you are able to conserve your V-Star power, and like you just dig through your deck enough that like it's pretty reasonable to find like a tech like that on like a specific turn you might need it, especially against like Lugia, when you'll almost always have access to like your Pheasantipity on like a turn that you might need it. So like you have a pretty sizable amount of draw and dig to like find a one of tech card. And obviously if you do play it, maybe you play down in like an earlier turn when it's not, for a Sinnoh example, like you play down in an earlier turn where it's not like the perfect turn to use it, but like if you can save your V-Star power and still have an attacking threat on board, you can just get the Sinnoh back when like you need it, and you don't have to like risk milling it without ever getting a use out of it.
And also like Lugia, like especially if you're playing down the temple early, like if you can just keep your hand on that turn, like if the temple allows you to keep your hand, which it does often, because if you put down temple, take a KO, they're not going to be drawing with gift, and often they can't put down a Luminion to search for an Iono because that becomes too much of a liability. Then you can like build a really big hand and pull off some of the bigger combos on the next turn. So you're getting advantage out of that temple, even if you weren't able to use it to shut off Mist or V-Guard or whatever on like a turn where you want to take a 4 prize turn.
Is Temple, we talked about some last podcast too, where specifically in Regidrago, where a lot of the squad was not super optimistic on playing something like Temple. If Temple is only giving you maybe like a 45-55 into Lugia, do you think it is worth the inclusion right now? Last time the answer was no, but that was when we were all much lower on Lugia, and obviously things have changed since then. So I'm curious what y'all think on that.
I think it is. I think you have to play a stadium, or you probably have to play a stadium because of the neutralization zone in either control decks or Guardy, which has become a little bit popular in online tournaments. So you need a counter. And then you can go for either Pokestop or Temple, but I think overall, like where I expect the play rate of Lugia to be overall through the tournament, you'll get more win percentage from the Temple than you will for Pokestop. But it's close.
Yeah, and jamming tower is also like theoretically another option, but I think Sinnoh is probably the best stadium to play in Drago. That doesn't mean like you necessarily have to play it, but it's pretty worthwhile with Lugia. Like Lugia is almost certainly going to be top 3, and I expect it to be top 2. And yeah, obviously the neutral center is a worry, so it makes a decent amount of sense to play.
Is there anything else we wanted to mention with Drago before we move on to some of the other decks in the format? A lot of decks to cover, obviously, but Drago is the one we should probably talk the most about. Any other thoughts on like weird tech cards or matchups, specific matchups, anything like that?
Don't play Raging Bolt. That card sucks. Play Giratina. Don't cut Gudra. That card's broken. I see people cutting Gudra, and I'm just like, okay, you're just gonna lose to Mirror every time if they're good.
I
Yeah,
don't think you need Gudra for Mirror.
so
I
good
think
versus
there's
Mirror.
other.
I don't
It's
know. I think
pretty
it's
good
good
in
versus
Mirror,
Mirror.
but
Good versus Raging Bolt too. That's another one. It's really good versus
yeah,
Bolt.
that's true. I think Gudra against Bolt is definitely a thing. I think Iron Leaves is the one card that I would not play without. That card just like it's so insane in Mirror, and just as a switch card that you can Ultra Ball for against Guardy is like very huge. Because a lot of the times like you'll pull off the Kyurem play and then just lose because you can't move your Drago for 5 turns while your opponent's like just
I mean, I feel like at that point you should just like not do the Kyurem.
Shouldn't be Kyurem.
If that's the
yeah, but if you're playing the Iron Leaves, it lets you do the Kyurem play. Like yeah, if you would get into a spot where you just can't move the Drago because of Kyurem, then it's not a good play to do. But Iron Leaves allows you to win those games by going early Kyurem and then moving your Drago pretty easily. Which I think just the ability to turn one attack in the Mirror is very, very big, to set up the Phantom Dive 4 prize. Also against Lugia, to have an attack where you don't have to energy switch that can knock out a Luminion is huge, because that leads to saving your V-Star power. Gudra is also good against Lugia, but I don't think it's as good. Like I don't have Gudra in my list right now. It's like definitely in there, like as the like one of the last cards that I would add in, like 61st or 63rd card or something like that. But I don't think the Gudra is necessary. I think you can get away in Mirror just going like Iron Leaves, Dragapult, Radzard is like the most consistent game plan.
Yeah, I guess if you play Leaves, then you probably don't need Gudra at that point. So if Leaves actually fixes the Mirror, because like that's a card that I personally haven't play tested a whole lot with, but if it does fix the Mirror match, then I guess you can cut Gudra then. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that the plans that you can set up just with like the fact that Leaves can set itself up and do like a very relevant amount of damage lets you save your V-Star powers so often, where you otherwise would have to burn it early and then you're just out of options at the end of the game. Where basically if Drago can take 2 prize cards without using the V-Star power, it's usually winning those games. Or if you can like use the V-Star power to take a 4 prize turn, then that also counts. I think it's winning those games, and Leaves just lets you do that way more consistently.
All right, so we kind of already covered some of the Lugia aspects, talking about that matchup with the Temple with Regidrago, but a deck that I think a lot of people are now expecting to be number 2, like you were saying, Michael, Lugia, deck I've played a lot, and a deck that I think is very strong going into this World Championships. Obviously, does have that solid Regidrago matchup, which is like the biggest reason probably most people will be looking at it. I guess the first place to start with Lugia is like the concern last time was the consistency of the deck. A lot of people, everyone on the pod last time was like, yeah, it's good, but it does feel more high rolly, more kind of less consistent than some of the other decks that you would consider playing. Do y'all?
That's still the concern, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that still the concern?
Right,
has that changed at all after playing more games with it or anything?
So we've actually like our group played like decent amount with Lugia, and it's just like it's just not consistent enough. We tried to like make our list like almost as consistent as it possibly can be while still having like all the options, and it just like it's not that far off if you try to like max out the consistency, but it's still not at like the level that you would want your first choice Worlds deck to be in terms of like consistency?
Like I think I've said this a couple times. I think Lugia is the most likely deck to win the World Championships, but it won't be any individual person playing it. Like you aren't gonna be the one to win the World Championships with Lugia. Someone will, but it won't be you because the chances that you're gonna draw well enough to do that is too low. So yeah, like even if Tord decided to show up with Lugia, like I would not be confident in Tord winning Worlds with Lugia, but someone out there has got the best chance to win the Worlds with Lugia. So I think if you're not like if you feel like you're on the lower end of skill going into the World Championships, like Lugia is definitely the deck to play. Yeah, like if I was worried about sitting down against Tord and not being able to beat him, then I'd most likely want to play Lugia in that situation. And if you want to win Worlds, like you got to think sort of in that mentality.
I think that the biggest thing for the deck is that the Regidrago matchup is relatively good. I also think the Gardevoir matchup is slightly favored as well because the majority of Gardevoir lists like don't play things like the Temple of Sinnoh anymore. So I think that matchup gets significantly stronger. I think the Zard matchup as well is actually relatively okay. And despite, like in my opinion, Zard not being like an incredible deck right now, I still think it's solid and it's going to show up in, I would probably say 8 to 10% max. So like you also have a decent spread versus some of those top decks. However, the deck just bricks so much. Like, and that's the problem with the deck. Like I was testing the Regidrago versus Lugia matchup, and I went second as Lugia. I got on one Lugia, and they went turn 2 Prime Catcher one shot. And I'm like, cool, this deck just doesn't really function as well as it should. And I think like back in the day when the deck was able to set up its matchup spread was just like so good, it kind of made up for some of the problems that it had. But like now, like even when you're setting up, you're still taking really just 55-45s and 60-40s at best versus the majority of things. Like at that point, like why aren't you playing something else? So I think like that's the problem with it. But I could definitely see it winning. I definitely think there'll be one in top 8 and probably one in top 4. I'd almost put money on it.
One thing I'll say is that I think the Cinccino build is like significantly better than the non Cinccino build, because like when you think about it, like almost every deck in format, if your Lugia opponent is setting up, they would rather be playing against the non Cinccino build than the Cinccino build.
Yeah.
In terms of like their matchup spread into Lugia and just like your opponent being able to have one prize threats that knock out your attackers, like assuming that they're relatively similar in consistency level, because I think they are, even without like the slots dedicated to the Cinchinos, you don't get that many like consistency spots in the non-Cinchino build. So I think at that point, I would just like almost always play the Cinchino build over the non-Cinchino build.
Yeah, as someone who has played a lot of games with both builds, even though I'm not going to Worlds, I've just been testing for Baltimore stuff. And we actually covered it in our latest tabletop video for the Dead Draw game. I did like 2 different builds against Vic. Even I have put in a 1/1 Cinchino line in my non-Cinchino builds because it's just too good. It's just too useful into a lot of things. I would say normally like the no Cinchino is like marginally more consistent just because you're going to start the Lugia more often and it is your best starter. Having something like Earthen Vessel is pretty nice too, just for like an extra discard. But I think it's very marginal consistency, and I think just the more generalist 2/2 Cinchino with the Weird Ear is like perfectly adequate for everything in the format. Also, I think the meta just shifted a lot from when no Cinchino was really good because there's just less little things to Iron Hands in general because everyone's just playing like Regidrago, Raging Bolt, those being really popular decks. Obviously, there's just bigger things you have to hit. You want to do more damage. You need Cinchinos to do more damage. I definitely am leaning in that direction as well. I think that Lugia, the Japan prep winning list, is like a really solid baseline for Lugia play in general. Gabe, you mentioned a lot of Gardevoirs are cutting like Temple and Hammer, and those are obviously very important in the Lugia matchup. Do you think with the way Lugia's been gaining steam that Gardevoir players and other decks that might tech for Lugia will be teching for Lugia for Worlds?
So when it comes to Gardevoir, I think that your matchup versus Lugia, if you don't play a Lugia tech, is like 45-55 at like worst from my testing. When it comes to something like Regidrago, when you don't play Temple, your matchup is like 30-70. So like at that point, I don't think it's worth to play something like a Temple of Sinnoh. like for that matchup because the matchup is already fine. So if I was playing Gardevoir, I would be very surprised if there was a Lugia tech in my list. So yeah.
I think in Guardy, I don't think one card aside from TM Devo, like I don't think one card is getting you as big of a an overall win rate boost as like an enhanced hammer is though, because I think Lugia is going to be very popular, and like if you're going to hit like 3 Lugia on your way to winning the tournament, like enhanced hammer is bumping like 10% like 3 times. That's a pretty big difference for just one card. I think Guardy needs to do that. Like they'd rather have that bump than like a consistency bump because I think in general Guardy's like Regidrago matchup is like pretty rough. And if you're going to play Guardy, you need to be 100% of the time beating everything else that is not Regidrago. So you need to be playing the techs to get you there. Um, like I'd love to play a Guardy for Worlds, but I don't think it's worth it because of the Regidrago matchup. Um, but if I was playing Guardy, like I'd be accepting the loss to the 20% Regidrago and then making sure that I destroy the rest of the 80% of the field. And if I hit those 80% decks, then I'm winning the tournament and dodging the Regidragos. And if I hit the Dragos, then I'm hoping they brick. Because yeah, that's all you can do.
The problem with Gardevoir as well that like I feel like on like the first turn of the game, your deck doesn't set up all the time. So I feel like if you're adding in something like enhanced hammer, I don't know, like I was had a lot of games where I'm just like this hand is, completely terrible. So like that's where I guess maybe my mentality, like when it comes to the world championships, is that you have to get pretty lucky. So I would maybe be more in favor personally of just saying, I hope to dodge this matchup, or like when I play against this matchup, I hope that, something like the turn two hands doesn't like necessarily happen. So I guess I would be more, I guess, under the impression of maybe you could just like high roll with the deck, but I think it does go both ways.
I think that's also my reason why I would play enhanced hammer
Cut the
because
consistency and play more text. Yeah.
yeah
That's the other
yeah
argument.
yeah like say that I'm gonna if I draw well this tournament and because like one card isn't gonna make like that much big of a difference. Like you're usually not cutting like you can cut like an attacker or something like even like lists don't have to play Cresselia or something like you can depending on the matchups that you're fine with. I think like enhanced hammer is winning you more percentage overall than something like a Cresselia or even like a random consistency card. Like I think obviously I'd rather play all of those cards, but if you can't, I think if I'm playing Guardy, I'm going in with the mentality that I'm going to win the matchup roulette, and then like if I hit the matchups that I want, the tournament's going to go my way. And if I have that mentality, then I want to be like guaranteeing my wins against the non-Regidrago decks. Whereas like I don't think Gardevoir is a good enough deck that it'll win if it just sets up. I think it needs to do more than just set up, and that's why I'd play the card. But yeah, I could be wrong. I'm not sure.
I don't know, dude. I feel like I don't like when I get the triple curly out, I'm like, all right, I beat everything. But
And then you get
that's just my
Cologne.
mentality.
I think in a format without like Drago being the best stack, like Guardy with triple Corellia is almost enough to beat most decks. But I think with Drago being the most popular deck and having such a, for the most part, positive matchup in Guardy, I agree with Jake that just setting up is not enough to put you through like to the finish line in this format.
As we're talking so much about Gardevoir, we can talk about that next. But is there anything else with Lugia anyone wanted to mention? I guess if some people played Roseanne's in day 2 in the IC, so I guess put that back in if you're worried about Gardevoir. I think that's the only real takeaway. Anything else that y'all want to mention with Lugia?
Yeah, I think the deck should be playing Pheasantipity. I think that card is like way too powerful in Lugia not to play. Like first of all, just a snipe attack like against Charizard or Gardevoir. If they just put one like specifically against Charizard, if they just put down one Pidgey, you can Pheasantipity their Pidgey as your first attack, which is pretty big. But aside from that, like a gift energy Pheasantipity guarantees that you're going to draw cards on the next turn. So you're completely immune to Iono. And a lot of the time, like in especially like the Charizard matchup, A lot of it is just, you need boss on there, Rotom, Lumineon, Fezandipity, whatever they have on the bench. And if you draw that, you win the game. And Fez just adds so much like to that line. Like it's not as helpful against something like Gardevoir, where you're just trying to go for like the Iron Hands, but at the same time, like Gardevoir, if Gardevoir does play the Enhanced Hammer, they'll often go for like the Enhanced Hammer, the Legacy off of the Iron Hands, and then Screamtail or Gardevoir EX knock out an Archeops. And in that case, you very gladly have a Fezandipity in play that can draw you cards. Yeah. And the deck plays so much search anyway that you'll be able to find it too. Like if you run out of Luminions, that's just another card that you can search for to get you late game consistency.
Yeah, I think I talked about Fezandipity last podcast too, and I was like, same thing where it's like, yeah, if you put a gift on that, it's so disgusting. It's so good. It can just really solidify a lot of your leads. I like it a lot. The main thing that's kind of been apparent to me from testing is like, it's really, really good in every game where you're like taking the first knockout and you're like ahead the whole game, because you can have it safely on your bench, no problem. You can just always draw cards, always get your boss, get your combos. But on the games where you're behind, you basically like can't play it until the turn like after, where it's until like it's a very specific safe turn, because like a lot of times against something like Drago, I'll try to set up like a one prize board state with a legacy energy. I can't have that on board. I just kind of have to hope that if they Iono me or any sort of hand disruption happens, that I can just put it down the next turn if I draw into, you know, the ball search or whatever. But every time you're in the lead, it is one of the best cards to have in play. It's so good, so good.
I think if I'm playing Lugia, I'm making the assumption that I want to win every single game I can possibly get. Like if I get a lead, I'm not going to lose that game.
Yeah,
and that's my plan playing Lugia.
That is what Fezandipity helps for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, the snipe attack's really good. I love it. Great card. So Gardevoir EX, like I said, next thing to talk about here. Obviously, we kind of covered a bunch with it already in terms of like tech stuff, but obviously we have multiple Guardy enjoyers here. A lot of people have played a lot of Gardevoir in this call. I am not one of them, but I think this is a deck that was also kind of hyped up for just being like really solid for this next format, and it's not like it really gained anything massive in terms of like new stuff. And the Regidrago thing is pretty scary, but is there enough reason to still consider Gardevoir as a top 3 deck with Regidrago being the number 1 deck, presumably?
I think I sort of put Guardy into the like anti-meta category now. Like I don't think it's I think if you're playing the deck, you're playing it in like sort of the same mindset that you have if you're going to play like a Block-Lax or even Charizard into this format, where you're playing it knowing that you have like a pretty atrocious matchup to Regidrago and you're hoping to dodge them. Like that, the Drago matchup isn't like a 30-70, but it's like it might be. It's like 35-65, I think. It's pretty bad. You can get wins, but like especially against like the Iron Leaves, like a lot of your they have all of their Ultra Balls are switch cards now. That's just very tough in my testing. So if you're playing Gardevoir, you're playing it to dodge Regidrago and then beat everything else, which is sort of like the same thing that if you're playing Block-Lax, you're playing it to dodge Lugia and beat everything else. So I think like Block-Lax and Guardy are like a similar type of deck. Guardy's going to be like way more popular,
sure.
Though, just in general, the Guardy can win in time, which is a benefit over like something like Block-Lax or control decks, where yeah, you can like ties are bad at the World Championships, but like if you're gonna want to win the tournament, you have to win in top cut rules, and that's a whole different thing from tying. So Guardy does have that advantage, and like in general, people just plan to play. I think a lot of people will just keep playing Guardy because that's what they've been playing for a while, and like you feel like you have a lot of control in a lot of your matchups, and like the small decisions do make very big differences. Like the Gardevoir mirror is like, I think it's one of the most difficult matchups of all time. Like current with the sort of the double Monkey Dory Flutter Mane stuff, especially when you add Devo into the mix. There's like some pretty insane like 3-turn lines that you can sort of walk into where you just like you're throwing away the game to an opponent who goes like counter catcher your Gardevoir EX, put like 90 on it with, or like if you attack with Gardevoir EX, your opponent. You have a bunch of damage on it. Your opponent can like Flutter Mane to set up, and then Devo Devo your Guardy and all your Curlias and stuff. You have to like watch out for all that. So I played a lot of Gardevoir Mirror the last month, and unfortunately, I don't think that testing is going to pay off because I'm probably not going to play the deck. The Drago matchup's just not good enough.
I think it's the weakest it's been in a long time. I think that heading into NAIC, in my personal opinion, one of the things going for the deck is I thought that like when you played Klefki, you had a pretty favorable Lost Box matchup. I'd say about 60-40 in my opinion. I think that's Lost Box is going to lose a lot of steam, as I think the deck is relatively mediocre right now. So that's a matchup that used to be pretty good against. That is not going to exist at the same level that it used to. Regidrago is probably going to be the most popular deck, which as Jake said, it's not a very good matchup for Gardevoir. I also think another thing is that one of your better matchups being Zard, heading into this format when the brand new set like was released, I think that people thought that Zard was going to be a lot stronger than it actually is. So, I think that Zard is probably going to be the 4th or 5th most played deck, which I think Gardevoir with the Devo package is pretty good against. So that's another like matchup that you're not exceptional versus. I think that the Raging Bolt matchup is losable as well. Most of the Raging Bolt lists are playing heavy Pokemon catcher now, and that actually makes the matchup relatively scary. So I think it's okay. Like when it gets set up, feel like you can control the majority of games, but I also think it's consistency is also kind of a problem too. I wouldn't be surprised if the deck did well, but I don't see myself personally choosing the deck at the moment. I think it just has a lot of issues. It's a fundamentally powerful deck with a lot of sketchy matchups. Yeah, that's the one last thing I wanted to mention. It's like fundamentally very powerful. It's just the matchups aren't there like they used to be.
Yeah, like the Lost Box meta share is getting completely replaced by Regidrago, where you're going from a favorable to very unfavorable matchup.
So NASC Lost Box is only like 8%. Like I think 8 to 10%.
Yeah.
I think Drago might hit 18%. Like I would not be surprised if it's like 15 to 20%. So like your matchup spread is just getting worse.
Yeah. Lost Box is going away, and Drago's like doubling its meta share. So yeah. Also, I think like some of the more like aggressive decks that people usually play, like Raging Bolt, like Drago's going to be eating into that meta share too. Where is like Guardy is what was typically good against those more aggressive decks, but now it's not, because Regidrago is going to be eating into that meta share as well. So like anybody who has been playing Raging Bolt is definitely going to have Drago on their like plate of considerations for decks, whereas like somebody playing Lost Box is like more inclined to choose something else that's not like an aggressive deck. So I don't know. I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense, but just following the trends of what like, because there's a lot of people going to this World Championships, and so I think a lot of people are going to be playing something similar to what they've been playing for the past season. And if you sort of follow which decks are similar to ones that people have been doing well with, like Regidrago is on that list of most similar decks to things like Raging Bolt or Miraidon, and so people gravitating away from those decks that are typically good for Gardevoir to ones that are now bad for Gardevoir is like a big difference maker.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a lot less reason to play it now that Drago has kind of taken over. So would not be surprised to see it fall pretty hard on the standings. I was gonna say earlier, like I think the main reason you play it is because you think you'll just beat all the other Guardies in Mirror and also not hit Dragos. And I feel like at that point you're probably just gonna play something else anyway. So doesn't seem that great. So I think the next deck to talk about that is also on Fraud Alert is Charizard EX, which is a deck that, again, very hyped, has shown up pretty poorly online. A lot of people are just kind of going away from it completely, and we can say it's on Fraud Alert because next set it comes back and eats everyone's lunch. But until then, it seems like stocks are pretty low on it. Can we make a case for playing Zard in this format at all?
You've been playing it all season, and it's your comfort pick. Comfort over everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Unless the deck is like completely terrible, which I don't think the deck is completely terrible, but I think that its matchup spread is just very mediocre. I think the Gardevoir matchup is not great. The Lugia matchup is close, but I think it's like definitely very losable. And the Regidrago matchup is just not good. Like I've
I
played
mean, it
that
has
matchup
a
so
better
much.
Drago than Guardy, but it's still bad.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
You have
That is
have
true.
worse other matchups than Guardy, so it's like it's just not great.
It's also kind of bricky sometimes too. And in this format, there's a lot of very fast decks. So I think that stumbling gets, I would say, more amplified in this format. So that's another problem you have to deal with too. So it's just kind of mediocre. I don't think it's exceptional. I think that someone will do well with it. Just because I think there's just going to be a lot of people that just like play the deck because it's Zard, and it's something that like they've been playing the full season. But yeah, that's where my thoughts are on it. It's just okay. It's nothing special. It's probably a tier 2 deck right now. I don't think it's tier 1 or tier 1.5.
Yeah, I agree. I think like in general, like Pidgeot is like the strongest engine in the game if you're able to put the Pidgeot in play. But like the best deck on the format is designed to stop your Pidgey from living, and so that causes a lot of headaches for the deck. And like in general, Zard, like even if you try and play like just the barrel engine ones, like I've seen some lists with the Mochi and like Tatsugiri barrel. I think that build like might have a little bit more. Like I have to put more time into that to see if it actually is good or anything. But I think like Pheasantipity and Dusknoir are big boosts to the deck, like just saving space, and also like the power. Like Dusknoir is just an inherently like really powerful card, but only if you can like keep your basics alive, and so that means you also need a plan for Regidrago, which is going to be Phantom Diving as early as turn 2, maybe even Curaming. So yeah, you're just put your turn 1, like you're put more pressure on your turn 1s, and like also it doesn't help that like Zard normally wants to go second. It's best to go second in every matchup except for maybe Lugia, but also Regidrago. So that hurts the deck a lot because like going blind, you have to choose if you're going to sacrifice all of your other matchups by choosing first to give yourself a bit better chance against Regidrago, or if you're just going to take that hit to Regidrago as well. So that's like another thing not going for it. Like there's no good option for what you're doing blind in the tournament. So yeah, like as the tournament goes on, your Zard win rate's going to go up because you're going to figure out what everybody else is playing and be able to choose the first or second against them. But the early rounds will be a bit rough, I think. Also like the Guardy Devo package is very annoying to deal with too, which is something that they weren't playing before. And like before Guardy had that option to knock out everything, the matchup was pretty good. But it's really hard to tech against like the Devo package, especially because like the best tech against Devo is Mist Energy, but I think a lot of Guardies are going to play Enhanced Hammer or Temple, so they can get around that too.
Yep.
Yeah, the Devo changes it like 20%.
Yeah.
I think that Zard was favored probably 60-40, and then they added Devo and it flipped it to like a 40-60, which is crazy. That just like one singular card like can't actually do that. And that's a big problem. And I think that like Mist like obviously is good, but Mist was also pretty good versus the Lost Box matchup, and Lost Box isn't really expected to see a whole lot of play as well. So it's like, are you really going to play like a one-of card for like a deck that's probably going to be 10%? That's kind of what you have to ask yourself.
Yeah.
And then like even
the
then
Mist
like
helps the Mist helps a little bit against Drago too, but yeah, because of the Drago.
Doesn't do a whole lot though. I don't know.
Yeah, you have to like start it in your opening hand if you see it there. But yeah. Yeah.
And you play Colress's Tenacity, and then you can search out your Mist Energy, and then you're good to
go. Yeah, and then your Kyurem is one energy card.
Don't worry about that. That's different. That's next turn's problem. Any other thoughts on Charizard then? Obviously, it's going to rebound pretty hard in next format, but it does seem like it has fallen pretty hard here. I'm sure somebody will figure out a build of it that is pretty solid, and we'll just do really well with it regardless. But it will probably come down to just dodging a lot of the Regidrago in the room. But yeah, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see the play rate of Zard, because like at the World Championship, if this was like a regionals or something, like I'd expect Zard to still be like at least like 13%, probably like up even more than that. I guess at NAIC it did have a really low play rate.
It was very low, yeah.
But
you wouldn't think it was very good though at that point too.
Yeah,
I think it was underplayed at that event.
It was definitely underplayed.
Was, yeah.
Because Dragapult was all the hype for that event.
And
so
again,
even the average player cut off.
We said on the podcast, Charizard's the play for NAIC, and nobody listens to us. Anyway, go ahead.
But yeah, so I think it'll be interesting, like, because at the World Championships you don't have like the normal people that just like they buy one deck and play it until it rotates. Like everyone at the World Championships is going to have access to every deck, and so how many people choose to stick with Zard despite all of its flaws will be interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how that'll end up.
Yeah,
we'll end up seeing.
Another deck to talk about then that has propped up mostly because people don't want to play Charizard because they don't think it's very good, and is also a big anti-Lugia deck that, again, this has popped up really like in the last 2 weeks. Basically, once the set came out, the deck started picking up steam. Is Miraidon rising from the ashes, surprisingly doing pretty well in some online tournaments. Has the solid Lugia matchup. Its only really bad matchup is the Zard, which no longer is really a threat. And then it kind of takes a lot of those like average matchups here and there, a lot of like 40 to 60 type stuff. You mentioned lightning decks in your tweet, Jake, and you talked about it. What are your thoughts on Miraidon?
Yeah, I think Miraidon's pretty well positioned going into the tournament. It's definitely underrated right now in like terms of how much it's being played online. Because got a good Lugia matchup. The Regidrago matchup is like slightly favored to like full on favored depending on the list. There's like a lot of different things that the Regidrago list can have that can change how that matchup goes. Like the Radzard and like basically how much access they have to like recycling Radzard is kind of a big thing in that matchup, because if you can Radzard twice, it's pretty hard for Miraidon to get around that. But they also have like the Pheasantipity and Tatsugiri Defiant Boss's Orders to just bring up the Ogre Pawns and stuff. So like Miraidon is probably the best deck. Like if the meta was just Lugia and just Drago and Lugia, then Miraidon is the best deck by far. But you have to worry about those other decks as well. It's got like a pretty bad Raging Bolt matchup, bad Charizard matchup. Guardy is a bit interesting. Like Guardy, like it 100% comes down to what their A spec is. Like if they're playing Hyper Aroma, you're just Iron Handsing them and not caring. And if they're playing Unfair Stamp, then you can have some issues. Especially if they're also playing like an Enhanced Hammer and you are playing like the double turbos in there for Iron Hands. Like you can get an early Iron Hands attack, but like Unfair Stamp, Enhanced Hammer, the same combo that's great against Lugia is good against that situation as well. So yeah, if you don't think that the Guardy players, if you think the Guardy players are going to be playing like not all on the Unfair Stamp and like Enhanced Hammer, then that matchup's pretty good as well. So if you can dodge the Raging Bolts and the Charizards, then you're going to be and hit your generators. You have to do that too, and draw the generators off your Professor's Research.
That's the easy part.
If you can manage to do all that, you're going to be having a great time.
Pheasantipity helps the deck a lot.
Yeah,
Pheasantipity makes. I actually think that I would say Pheasantipity makes the Charizard matchup a little bit stronger. I think like pretty much versus every high HP deck that can usually pretty effectively prize race you. I think the Pheasantipity helps because like a lot of the time you have to pair that up with like a generator plus a gust effect. So like Pheasantipity like definitely kind of helps you like get there. I think that probably the two decks that benefit the most from Pheasantipity are probably Raging Bolts, and then I would also say probably Miraidon as well. I think those decks get helped just so much by that card.
Yeah, I've been playing a lot of my stream lately. I did some test games too when Vic was over here, and yeah, it's like the amount of, if you have like Mew EX, Pheasantipity, and Ninja down, then like it doesn't matter what your opponent does to your hand because you're just gonna draw into everything and you're gonna get your combo off for the next turn, no problem. It definitely has been a huge buff for this format with the Pheasantipity. Just it's so much harder to whiff your combos and stuff. It's easy to whiff your generators still, but the actual combos and getting the amount of cards you need to hit those combos is very doable and is definitely a big buff for it for sure. And I think with more of the Lugia hype, and again, if Miraidon is good into the top two decks in the format, that seems like a pretty reasonable play. And if its biggest anti-deck is not going to be super played, it seems like it'll be pretty popular. Any other thoughts on Miraidon in general? Obviously, like it it's kind of like so new that people haven't like really tested it super thoroughly yet. At least like most people haven't. But is there any other thoughts on it?
I think it's just another research deck.
Another
You've
high
got
roll deck, yeah.
the three big research decks. So if you can research into what you want without discarding what you don't want to discard, then you're winning a lot of games.
Yep.
But that's the biggest issue. So it's like it's hard to play. It's hard to justify playing these decks. Like if you think you're one of the best players in the game, it's hard to justify playing those decks because Lugia, Miraidon, they're a bit high rolly. Drago's a little bit different because you have the you can get back a lot of your resources with Drago, but and relying on generators as well. But it's a lot more consistent than Lugia. So if you're between Lugia and Miraidon, I think I'd go for the Miraidon.
Wow.
Like personally, I'd rather play that deck than Lugia.
The Jake Gearhart stamp of approval for Miraidon for Iron Hands EX.
It doesn't get my approval. It gets my. I'll rank these ones above the other one.
You are ranking two Iron Hands decks against each other. So I guess that's
if you have to play an Iron Hands deck, I guess I'm playing the generator one instead of the one that you have to see Ultra Ball in the first turn, otherwise you're losing the game.
Yeah,
which is Lugia.
Yeah, and it's another thing where it's like the Drago can't really like tech for you the way they can for Lugia, so it seems really good. It really caught me off guard when I started playing some games with it. It's surprisingly good. So
I do think the Iron Leaves is actually a really big tech in Drago or a really good card in that matchup.
Sure.
Because if the Miraidon player, like if they throw up a one prizer, you can take a one prize knockout and then it like forces them to not be able to bench Tatsugiri because that'll get Dragapulted. And if they start like a Miraidon or an Iron Hands or something, you can hit it with the Leaves and then Dragapult for 4 prize cards.
Yeah.
Leaves is just a really big card in like basically every single one of Drago's matchups.
Yeah, I don't think you can call it a tech card anymore. It seems kind of like a staple.
Yeah.
I think that has gone beyond the bounds of a tech card, but honestly,
it just combos so well with Dragapult.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, it does. There's so many things that 180 plus 60 can just knock out basically any basic EX or V. It's pretty strong. I definitely expect to see Miraidon go up, and honestly, I could see a top 4 meta for sure at Worlds. But I think it's also because I think everything outside of the top 2 will be like very spread percentage. But the other lightning deck I wanted to mention, because we didn't talk about it all last time, and it is technically worth mentioning because it has seen more play online than I think people expected, was Quad Thorns. Just another kind of control answer. Is there... Why should you play Quad Thorns? I don't know enough about its matchup spread.
If you don't want to think, that's pretty much it. Like, if you want no skill expression, you just want to say, I lose to a Canceling Cologne versus Regidrago, I get smacked by Raging Bolts, I lose to a Fluttermane and Lugia. You have to hope all the stars align and that everything works perfectly, and then the deck's actually pretty good. However, the problem is that that's not really realistic, I think. Yeah. If you want to completely YOLO your tournament, then Iron Thorns is a decent play. But at that point, then maybe playing something like Miraidon or Lugia is just kind of a better option. But it's great fun.
If you play Judge, the Drago matchup actually is like kind of close. It might even be a Thorns favored because if you turn 1 Judge them, they're not doing anything for the next like 5 turns. So you're gonna win a lot of the games by doing that. Like if they can't find their Canceling Cologne in the first like 5 turns of the game, they're in real trouble. But yeah, if you're like a Drago player, I definitely get a couple games in with that matchup because it is pretty interesting how you have to play it from the Drago side. Like I've noticed Motivate from Squawkabilly is actually like really big a lot of the time, just to recharge attackers. Because you can, like all your attackers that one-shot Thorns would get rid of your energy, like Raging Bolt or Tina. So you have to 2-shot things, and then you can get your like Fire Energy Enhanced Hammered, and then finding the recovery cards to get that back is a bit of an issue. So if you can like work in a turn where you get like a Squawkabilly or even like a couple Squawkabilly attacks like at the start of the game is like really, really powerful. Because a lot of the times like Iron Thorns will like halfway through the game they'll just miss attacks for a couple turns because their hand is dead and they had to move all their energy to a benched Iron Thorns. So if you can motivate a couple times while they're doing that, you can like checkmate them in spots, which is pretty interesting.
It's a theme deck, basically. That's like the whole like moral of the story is that it's a theme deck.
Yeah,
But it's not the worst theme deck we've ever seen before.
One thing I'll say for the Drago perspective versus that matchup is that, yeah, the Motivate is really good. And if you do play the Gudra, like once you get a Drago established, like if they're attacking with like a Thorns with the DTE, they're doing 60 damage to your Drago. So it definitely gives you a lot more longevity. But as Jake said, like a lot of lists don't play the Gudra, and it's not really it's not a necessary card for you to have in your deck. It's a niche matchup that it would help you out in a little bit.
I was gonna say you can also do some interesting things with Curum. Like if they bench like all of their Dragos at the start, you can like win in a couple fewer attacks with like Dragapult a couple times and Curum. It can sometimes happen, but that's more from the Thorns side. Just don't bench all of your Thorns at the start of the game because you'll run into issues by doing that. Where if you just keep 2 in play at a time, you're gonna be fine. As fine as you can be anyway.
Sure. All right, we have covered Quad Thorns. All the Quad Thorns fans in the chat can or in the comments can't complain to us now. Go play it for Worlds. Sounds good. So next is Raging Bolt, which is another deck that has kind of gained a lot of I don't know if steam is the right word, but it's definitely seeing a lot more play and it's being taken a lot more seriously than it was for NAIC. Primarily because like I think most people were afraid of Guardia at NAIC, right? Was that like the big thing for Raging Bolt? So things obviously have changed since then, and Raging Bolt seems like it's pretty solid in general. Does have that solid Drago matchup and can kind of just handle everything to a decent degree. Has a good Miraidon matchup too, so I guess it's more reason to even consider playing it. But so I think we'll start with Michael then. What are the reasons to play Raging Bolt? Like what match? Like if you're expecting the meta to be a certain way, right? Like what would the meta need to look like for you to play Raging Bolt?
So I think Raging Bolt is like probably the most consistent deck we have in format of like the decks that people would actually consider. I think you have it's not as much so with Iron Leaves because it gives them a decent option if they go second, but you're pretty favored into Regidrago. Assuming you get the first 2 prize knockout, you have a pretty good chance of winning the game. I believe that it is like slightly favored into Lugia because if you can just like get that first 2 prize knockout, a lot of times this is also with the catcher build, so that's what most of my testing knowledge speaks of. But you kind of force them to bench 2 Lugias, which just makes like their game plan like so awkward, and they really don't want to bench Luminion because it like fixes your prize trade. So I think, and favorite into Miraidon, which is like a smaller, but I think like those 2 matchups for me are like a decent selling point for Raging Bull because not a lot of decks cover those 2 matchups very well.
Yeah, I think the Bolt matchup is actually like bad into Lugia. It depends on the Lugia list, obviously. Like Chinchino makes a very big difference. But like I often find like you put 2 Lugia down and then one of them will get knocked out. The other one gets a legacy energy. And then you've like removed a 2 prizer from play because of that. So that if you have Chinchinos, you can uptrade like 2 times, and that's good enough to win the game. If you have to play Luminion down, they'll need to miss a gust effect on one of the turns. So that has to happen. But I don't think it's like too unrealistic for Bolt to miss that. Like especially if like Lugia can like I guess Bolt has like Pheasantipity changes the matchup a lot for Bolt for sure because they're like able to chain gust more often. But I think like if you can work in if the Lugia player can set up Chinchinos and either the Bolt player misses the turn 1 like 2 prizer knockout or like on their first turn attacking misses the 2 prizer knockout, or you don't have to bench Luminion from the Lugia side, I think you're favored from that point because you can put the legacy energy on the Lugia. But if you want to tech for the Lugia matchup for Raging Bolt, like an enhanced hammer would go a long way. or like a Temple of Sinnoh,
Sure.
just to be able to get rid of that legacy energy and take the 2-prize KO.
One thing I saw some people putting the thin Dusknoir package into Bolt, and honestly, like if your Lugia opponent's doing the Legacy Lugia line, it can fix a lot of your prize trade to just go if you have the Dusknoir, because the Dusknoir build doesn't really put any one prizes in place, so it doesn't change the matchup. It does if you do bench Squawk, it opens up the possibility of them to just go hands kill Squawk and get back on an even prize trade. But for the most part, I think the Dusknoir is really interesting in that matchup.
Yeah, Dusknoir also helps against like Gardevoir for sure. Like if you're able to use that before the Gardevoir player sets up Monkey Dories to knock out your Duskull, you're like favored from that position. Like obviously getting the Candy Dusknoir playoff is like kind of inconsistent in the early game, but it's like it's a pretty big boost to the Gardevoir matchup just having that possibility of hitting that. And then if you're playing fitting in the catchers alongside that somehow, then you're also having a good time against Guardy.
Did you have any thoughts, Gabe, on Raging Bolt?
It's good. Yeah, I definitely think it's better now than it was for NAIC, just kind of because of the meta shift. It gains a pretty decent matchup in Regidrago. It's also not the hardest deck to play as well, so I think that like, if you're someone who doesn't necessarily like want to play a super hard deck to play and just kind of needs to learn sequencing like of the deck, that's pretty much all you have to do. I think is, kind of learn the sequencing. The matchups kind of play out naturally themselves. As long as you're able to set up. I think it's a decent deck. I definitely expect them to do well. I don't think it's as consistent as people say, specifically on the first turn. I've been seeing a lot of lists pretty much just play 4 Nest Ball as the only ball search, and I've been running into some problems with that. So Ultra Ball, maybe playing 1 to 2 might be something like it might be something to think about. But like once you get going, once you get the Pheasantipity down, it's, really, really strong. It's just, kind of getting to that point, which can be actually kind of a little bit shaky. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I felt like the first turn of the game was like really, really scary with the deck. But once you get past that turn, it feels good.
All right, really quickly. I know Michael has to leave soon, so some viewer questions. I think those are really the main decks we want to talk about. We can cover some more stuff in the bonus episode as we have time. But from Taylor D, does Gardevoir actually have the juice to go the distance in this field? I think the vibe was no from the answers people were giving earlier. So we'll cover that. And then Universe Gaming asking, is this the end of Lost Box? Kyurem is definitely a big reason to the question, but it seems like a lot of decks are too powerful and are now having more options. And it seems like Lost Box obviously not getting any support and more getting anti-support, more haters for it. I think we've kind of talked about it a little bit in like various videos. Like Hedrick was like, yeah, there's a good chance that people play Lost. Like Lost Box will probably get played to Worlds, but not to any like super big degree. Do we think we'll see Lost Box like again at all? Like within like as like a 6% plus deck in these next few tournaments?
I mean, one day we might, but I think if as long as Regidrago's a deck, it's like the matchup is just atrocious. Like Lost Box does gain Pheasantipity, which is actually like a huge card for the deck. But I think like the issue with the Regidrago matchup is not even that they can just do a board wipe play, like knock out 3 things at once, but just that they have a 130 HP one prizer that attacks for 1 energy. That's like Lost Box's nightmare already. And the fact that it can board wipe them too is just another issue. So the matchup is just it's atrocious. Yeah, the more like recovery Drago plays for the Kyurem, the worse it gets, because you knock out the Kyurem, they get another Kyurem back, and just knock out a Comfy, and yeah, what are you doing? But yeah, so if Regidrago goes down in play rate for whatever reason, then maybe we'll see Lost Box come back again. But like I suspect that's why they printed Kyurem, is because Lost Box was doing too well with Pheasantipity, like being able to Colress and draw 3 cards as well on top of that is like that's pretty good.
You have to play 2 Manaphy moving forward. If that's something you want to play for Worlds, you have to play 2.
I'm not even sure like that's true, because Kyurem is not gonna be like I don't think Kyurem will be in like almost any other deck besides Regidrago, and even without Kyurem, like the Drago matchup is like horrible for Lost Box. Like it's not good at all.
I think Kieran's the main problem. It's not great, but I think it's
No,
winnable.
because
I think the
Drago's already a huge problem matchup for Lost Box in the previous one. It just wasn't like a very played deck.
I think like Phantom Dive plus a 130 HP one prizer that attacks for 1 energy for 110 damage is too good.
Yeah, I mean like that just like destroys
like,
Lost.
you don't ever have to Trifrost for more than 1 prize card a turn, and it's already an issue for Lost Box to deal with. Like maybe if Cram did 130 damage, then maybe it'd be different. But yeah, you're not putting 2 Articuno from Pokemon Go on your bench to fix that matchup.
Yeah. I will plug Hunter Butler did just put out a Cutter Tap article on how he would play Lost Box in this next format. So if you're interested, definitely check that out. We're going to do a bonus episode in just a little bit for the Patreon. We will bring in Hunter Butler for that, and he can talk about that more. So if you're interested in hearing about that as well, definitely subscribe to our Patreon. We'd really appreciate the support. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of the Dead Draw Gaming Podcast. Again, a lot of Worlds content coming out soon. Really excited to head out to Hawaii in a couple days. Jake, shout-outs, where can people find you, etc.?
You can find me on Twitter at Jake Gearhart, as always, and on this channel, of course.
Gabe?
Smart TCG on all socials. I'll be opening up my coaching after Worlds. Probably going to take a couple weeks off, so I'm kind of excited for that. And yeah, hope to see many of you guys at the World Championships, and shout out to Dead Draw Gaming.
Michael?
My Twitter is just Allez Liverpool, ALLEZ Liverpool.
All right. Thank you all so much for listening again. Be sure to subscribe to the Dead Draw Gaming YouTube to not miss any of the World's content. Again, a lot of on-site interviews, minute-to-minute content, real-time coverage of the World Championships. I'm really excited for it. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss out. And we'll see you all in the next episode. Bye-bye.